I'm Derek Johnson, President and CEO of the NAACP, and I want to welcome our guest today. Dave?
Thanks for having me, Derek. Great to be part of your convention. We're honored to be here. And I'm Dave Hoffman, CEO of Dunkin' Brands, which is the franchisor of both Dunkin' and Baskin-Robbins brands.
Good, good. So, thinking about this time last year, neither one of us could have imagined sitting wherever we're sitting. I'm home, matter of fact, in the midst of a health pandemic, but still carrying out a virtual convention. These are very unprecedented times. Tell me, Dave, what are some of the things that you are considering in the midst of this new norm?
Yeah, I think it's had us reevaluate everything as we've gone through this. And, just to take a step back, I don't know if many people know we're 100% franchised on both Dunkin' and Baskin side. And look, a big brand name, but really a collection of small independent business owners who drive our brands. And those are people who live and work in the communities they serve. And for 70 years, community has been at the heart of who we are as a brand. And, during this whole pandemic, we've had a saying that we've tried to rally around, which is we've got your back. And we've got your back, meaning, we've got the backs of the communities and our guests and our crew people. And look, I think, Derek, as you and I have talked about, what this pandemic and what's going on right now in the world around, especially on the social injustices that we're seeing, it's really exposed, the disparities in the communities, and as we've talked about, particularly in the underserved Black communities. And I guess I just would make one more comment about our franchisees. Again, they live and work in these communities, and where things have changed for us, the conversations, especially at the national level with our franchisees, have really evolved. Where prior to this, we would have talked about operational improvements around how do you make beverages and donuts and things like that, our marketing promotions and so forth. But now the conversation has been about the communities. And look, if you're going to stand by the community has been at the heart of your brand for 70 years, then it's about conversations around how do we do more. And I'm really proud of our franchisees and what they've done. We all know that we can do more in this time, but I think what's really happened for us as an organization is this idea that you can't be self-contained. You have to, think bigger and look out into the community and what's your role in that community. If you're going to be, for the people and by the people, then you have to give back to these communities. And that's really where I think a big shift in our organization right now.
So at NAACP, we are 111 years old with the mission proactively to improve the quality of life for the communities we serve, primarily African Americans, but also other disenfranchised communities. Reactively, we fight against discrimination. And oftentimes we are trying to move to the proactive part of that mission of improving the quality of life. If individuals want to be involved with your corporations, particularly as franchise owners, what would you recommend?
Yeah, and look, I'm really proud, Derek, of the partnership that we have. And look, you and I agreed on, a few things that we want to move forward and make Dunkin' a more progressive company in this area. And one of them that we talked about was around building wealth with the Black community. And look, we're 100% franchised. I don't know how often, people have thought about us, especially in the Black community, in terms of, considering us for franchise opportunities. And so as we've talked about this, I am proud that our franchise base is 45% diverse. It's just underrepresented in terms of Black Americans. And we think this is a great opportunity for us to move the business forward. And look, after our conversation, I would like us to work together. I really count on the NAACP to help me, tap into the community and bring business people and people who are interested forward to be part of this our franchise system. So, look, it's going to rely on both of us to bring this forward. But I want to leverage our platform together to open this up to the Black community and bring folks in. And look, this is for any franchisee. It's about a partnership and making sure that we set people up for success. And when we get this right, the customer wins, the community wins, and that's what we're looking to accomplish.
And I like the fact that you recognize that although you're 45% diverse, it's still underrepresented with the African American community. And far too often, corporations conflate diversity with access for African Americans. And so we really appreciate you recognizing that. If there was a silver bullet moment for you in your corporate space, in your franchise space, what would that silver bullet be for you to right size representation and opportunities for African Americans?
Yeah, again, I'll come back to our partnership, and look, this is going to be a journey for us, and what I'm going to talk about are three areas that you and I specifically wanted to go after, and make improvements and be more progressive in. And so one, as we just talked about, was around creating wealth for Black America, and especially using our platform as franchising. And we think that's a great opportunity, and so we're ready to move forward on that. The other pieces that we've talked about is representation at the highest level. And for you and I, it was a commitment around representation at the board level and representation in the C-suite level. And so, after we've talked, I met with our board. They know about our partnership with you and the NAACP and our commitments there. And look, we've already moved on a very public board search. We're going to add a board member, expand our board, and move on this. And again, it's not going to stop there, but you're helping me with that slate of candidates that we're looking at. And as the CEO of this company, the board is really my boss. And it's so important, if we're going to continue to push this company forward, it's so important that I get somebody who not only I can talk to on the business side, but somebody that can be a coach to me on the issues that are going on in the community right now around social injustice and so forth. And so it's going to be critical that we get that person in position. And then, as I've talked about with you, C-suite representation is absolutely important. So you've got my commitment that we're going to move on these. We both have a same approach, which is, this isn't about going out and grabbing headlines. This is about, let's make progress, let's get results, and then let's talk about how we got those results. And I think one of the things you've said to me, which I admired right off the bat, is, hey, conversations and listening is great, but it only matters if you bring it to action. And so we're committed to bringing this to action. And like I said, this is going to be a journey. I don't see this as a finish line. This is going to be a journey.
We are in a unprecedented moment. The current political landscape allow for us to openly talk about race in ways in which I don't think we've done in this country before, particularly from the community up to the corporate level. And what used to be an uncomfortable conversation now is a conversation that's necessary because the market share is changing. If you look at the Dunkin' brand, what do you see in terms of your growth, geography-wise, currently, particularly as it relates to the African American community?
Yeah, look, you're right about the conversation piece, and I think this has been a learning session a learning time for all of us. And I think those that believe in this know this isn't a moment. This is going to be a movement that we should capitalize on. And look, I'm really proud of the work we've been doing inside the organization. And you have to, I think, education, awareness, and understanding is sort of the first piece. I'm really proud of the listening sessions that we've had internally with the organizations with our Black employees. And we've tapped some really great individuals. They're really good in their field. Dr. Tiffany McDowell out of Chicago is one. Your very own Michael Curry, as part of the NAACP board, has helped us, Monica Cost. And they've helped us with creating an environment where we can have a conversation with our Black employees to understand what's going on within the organization. And look, I got to tell you, I don't think I lack from self-awareness, but it's leaves a pit in your stomach and gut wrenching when you hear these stories around what's going on in the organization. And it's around microaggression and different things. And Michael Curry educated us a lot on systemic racism. And I think it's created a great baseline for us. Now we've got a diversity and inclusion task force in place. to help action against those. But I'm really proud of our employees. I'm proud of their bravery, that they were able to, be in these environments and give us the insights that we needed to have. And I think, like you said at the very beginning, there's a special moment right here where we're at least having the conversations. Now it's about moving it to action.
Yeah, and I also want to add Larcene Bland, who serves on our foundation board, who's been a tremendous advocate, and she's been really good with keeping the relationship between NAACP and Dunkin' Brands moving forward. So, final question for you. NAACP, we were planning to be in Boston this summer. Of course, we could not be there. So we just want to make sure once we make the decision to come back in 2023, that Dunkin' Brand will be around to be our lead corporate sponsor to welcome us to the city. Can I get that commitment now?
You've absolutely got my commitment. Yeah. And it's not just that we want to do it, it's the right thing to do. Right. Yeah. You've got my commitment. Yeah. And looking forward to it. I can't wait till we can get through this safely and we can get back together and gather again. We'd be so honored to be part of it. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for this moment, this conversation. And I look forward to the partnership, but most importantly, I look forward to us jointly announcing outcomes from the partnership. That's one of the things that we live for. That's an important thing in the corporate space, but also it's an important thing in the civil rights space. Have a great rest of your day, and thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Derek, and I really appreciate the opportunity. And look, I've learned a lot from you in a short amount of time. It's not just about saying the right things; it's about doing the right things. And you've offered up to me that, hey, we might not always get it right, but you're going to get my best in this. And as we've talked, I found, if I can say that, I think we draw our inspiration from a similar place. And look, we're blessed to be in these two positions that we're in as CEOs. Yeah. And it would be a shame if we don't leverage our platform for good. And so you've got my commitment towards that. And we're honored to be part of this partnership.
Well, every Saturday morning, I used to see this commercial say it's time to make the donuts.
Thank you for that.
All right. Yeah. Take care.
All right. Thank you.
Good evening, fellow delegates and alternates. My name is Hazel Dukes. I'm chair of the National Nominating Committee. I will be presenting rules for persons who would like to be elected to the board of directors. The deadline to receive consent forms for a candidate to the National Board of Directors at the National Convention will be September the 18th by email at ballot@naacpnet.org no later than 10 a.m. For candidates wishing to make speeches, the official nominating speech reservation form must be submitted to the chairman of the election supervisory via email at ballot@naacpnet.org no later than 10 a.m. on Monday, September the 21st, 2020. Nominating speeches will be no more than 3 minutes each and no more than 1 seconding speech of 1 minute. These videos should be sent with the complete nomination speech reservation form and submitted via email at ballot@naacpnet.org no later than 10 a.m. on Monday, September the 21st, 2020. Only a certified voting delegate to the National Convention may place an individual name in nomination or second a nomination. Qualification: NAACP Constitution, Article 4, Section 3. Any member in good standing of the association who has been a bona fide member for at least 180 calendar days prior to the date nominations are made, and who has not been an employee of the association or any of its units during the 2-year period prior to the date nominations are made, and is affiliated with a local unit, shall be eligible to be nominated, elected, and serve on the board of directors. Consent forms may be requested by email at ballot@naacpnet.org by submitting a request for consent to the Election Supervisory Committee. Consent forms may be requested from the Election Supervisory Committee by email at ballot@naacpnet.org, following the chairman's address on the opening session of the convention on Sunday, September the 13th, 2020, to be considered by the committee. All consent forms must be submitted no later than 10 a.m. on the Monday, September the 21st, 2020 deadline. Election Supervisory Committee receive consent forms and petitions, email at ballot@naacpnet.org. Voting shall be conducted by secret ballot before the annual resolution session. Voting will commence on Saturday, September the 26th. All voting delegates to the convention are eligible to vote and will be authenticated through the process assigned for registered delegates. The nominee who wins 50% plus one of the ballot cast will be declared the winner. Any voter needing assistance will be assisted by a member of the Election Supervisory Committee or designee.
Good evening, this is Massachusetts Governor Charlie Baker, and I want to welcome you to the 2020 NAACP National Convention. We're honored that Boston was selected to host the convention this year, but we're of course disappointed that we're not able to host it exactly the way we intended to. We're all looking forward to welcoming you back in person to Boston in 2023. But while we can't be together in person, we're still glad to have the opportunity to convene virtually in support of the NAACP and all the critical work it does on behalf of Black Americans across the United States. Here in the Commonwealth, the Boston branch of the NAACP has a long history of fighting for the equal treatment of all. President Tanisha Sullivan has been a forceful advocate on behalf of the Black community in Massachusetts, in fact, for all people of color here in the Commonwealth, and is a valued partner to our administration. This summer, earlier, I was proud to sign a law making Juneteenth a state holiday in Massachusetts, permanently recognizing June 19th as a day to commemorate the end of slavery in the United States. And going forward, Juneteenth will be an opportunity to recommit ourselves to the goal of creating a more equal and just society. Massachusetts also leads the nation in advancing criminal justice reform. I was proud to sign into law an omnibus bill that decreases incarceration, enhances diversion programs, and invests in the people the system is meant to serve. And my administration was also proud to have recently filed a bill to license law enforcement and enhance accountability and transparency across all police departments, and we look forward to making that bill a law soon. I and so many of my colleagues in the Commonwealth recognize the urgent need for law enforcement reform. At this time, we must continue to strive to live up to the ideals of this organization and to support the NAACP because it is such a critical part of their mission. And over the next few weeks, I hope you'll have the opportunity to reflect, reconnect with old friends, and make new ones while engaging in difficult but important and necessary conversations. The convention will feature discussions around critical issues such as criminal justice reform, civic engagement, and making sure that your vote counts. With this year's loss of civil rights icons such as John Lewis and C.T. Vivian, I'm especially grateful that this conference brings together NAACP members from around the country to discuss the continued fight for justice. We remain committed to the work that must be done and to the NAACP's tireless efforts to promote a more just and fair society. I hope everyone enjoys this year's virtual convention, and as I said, we look forward to our continued collaboration on these important issues as we go forward. Thank you, and best of luck to all of you.
At FedEx, our people are our strength. Even during these unprecedented times, we are delivering medical supplies, test kits, and the things you need every day, helping the world move forward together. Strength, what we deliver by delivering.
Greetings, my name is Scott X. Esdale, and I'm the chairman of the Criminal Justice Committee of the NAACP National Board of Directors. I'm also the state president of the Connecticut State Conference of NAACP branches. As the National Criminal Justice Chair, it's very disturbing to see so much turmoil in this country pertaining to police accountability and so many officers hurting, paralyzing, and killing our people with no consequences. Black communities nationwide have seen catastrophic deaths from the coronavirus, and they've seen layoffs and loss of jobs that have been astronomical. We have seen some of the largest marches, protests, rallies, and riots the nation has ever seen since the 1960s. It seems like every week or every other day there's another fatal incident between the Black community and the police. Criminal justice reform has become the #1 issue in the nation. We applaud the young activists, the entertainers, the artists, and the athletes that are using their money, their gifts, talents, and their platforms to help the criminal justice reform movement across the nation. These activists have supported the NAACP with the We Are Done Dying movement. Once again, we as the NAACP and our community are done dying. The NAACP National Criminal Justice Committee encourages all of you to join your local criminal justice committee and prepare to get busy. For 111 years, the NAACP has fought against every major crisis, plot, and plan that has come against our people. We are an organization of freedom fighters that fights and wins. We fought against the KKK, Jim Crow, racist police departments, white racist politicians, the heroin epidemic, the crack epidemic, the AIDS epidemic, the war on drugs, mass incarceration, and everything else that's wrong with this nation. And throughout our history, the NAACP has always fought, and we are still standing. So we need you to get involved, get active, and continue to fight. Because when we fight, we win. Thank you for your support of the NAACP. Take care, be safe, and stay strong. Peace.
Hi, good evening, everyone. It's so wonderful to see you all. I'm so glad that some of y'all came back to day 2 of the 111th National Convention. I want to first thank the chair of the Mass Incarceration Criminal Justice Committee for the NAACP, the one and only notorious Mr. Scott Esdale. Thank you so much. My name is Tiffany Dina Lofton. I serve as the National Director of the Youth and College Division at the NAACP, and I will be the moderator for tonight's panel entitled Mass Incarceration, Black People, Power, and Politics. We've seen so much civil unrest this year, around the Black Lives Matter movement, around the economic justice movement, around the healthcare movement. And all of these things have an intersection when it comes to dealing with folks who look like me, folks who look like us, that are put in cages now across the country. And I wanted to make sure that we had a conversation tonight that was not just a regular panel that talked about the issues of mass incarceration, but brought together expert leaders, folks through their own lens and experiences, have been leaders and champions in the fight to end mass incarceration, to change the narrative around Black and brown communities, and to also push back against the violence that we see in this country. And so I brought together some of my close friends and folks that I just met who are doing this work around the country on the local level to make sure that we inspire, also make y'all a little uncomfortable, and give you some solutions to call to actions. I'm so excited about what we're going to talk about tonight, and I appreciate y'all for coming back for day 2. Now I'm going to introduce some of my panelists so we can get started. The first person I want to introduce is Mr. Shaka Senghor. Shaka Senghor is the president of Shaka Senghor Incorporated and founder of Redeemed Soul. His memoir, Righting My Wrongs, Life, Death, and Redemption in an American Prison, debuted on the New York Times and the Washington Post bestsellers list. His 2014 TED Talk was featured in their Years in Ideas Roundup and has over 1.6 million views. Shaka is a recipient of numerous awards, including the 2012 Black Male Engagement Leadership Award, the 2015 Manchester University Innovator of the Year Award, and the 2016 Ford Man of Courage Award, and the 2016 NAACP Great Expectations Award. He's recognized by OWN, Oprah Winfrey Network, and a soul igniter in the inaugural class of the Super Soul 100. Shaka Senghor builds and executes global strategies, develops through focused leadership and cultural campaigns as a consultant for businesses and nonprofit organizations internationally. Shaka, it's so good to see you, brother. Thank you so much for being here.
I'm really excited to be here. Thank you for inviting me into this timely and super important conversation.
Thank you, sir. I'm excited to hear from you. Next, we're going to invite Salim Holbrook. Salim Holbrook is an Abolition Law Center Executive Director, also known as the ALC. He's a co-founder of the Human Rights Coalition, an organization with chapters in Philadelphia and Pittsburgh that is comprised of family members and prisoners and which advocates on behalf of the civil and human rights of prisoners. He has a degree in paralegal studies and has also written extensively on issues related to prison abuse, social injustice, and juveniles charged and sentenced as adults. He was released from prison in 2018 after spending over two decades incarcerated for an offense he was convicted for as a child offender. Salim, brother, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. And last but certainly not least, we have Cynthia Garcia. Cynthia Garcia is the National Campaigns Manager for Community Protection at one of my favorite organizations, United We Dream. She leads that work, and it's the largest immigrant youth-led network in the country. She herself was protected from deportations because of DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrival Programs, which is now under threat. And as an out, queer, undocumented woman who grew up and lives in Oklahoma City, Cynthia has survived and thrived in spite of some of the darkest sides of American society and has led other youth immigrants and families to survive and thrive. Now, Cynthia runs a national hotline of support for immigrants whose family members have been abducted by ICE agents and teaches them how to organize and fight back. The project's work has stopped over 700 deportations and has received over 3,000 calls to help so far in 2020 alone. Cynthia, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much. I'm grateful to share space with powerful people, and I'm excited to get this conversation going. Thank you.
I'm excited. Listen, this is so intentional. And so I'm going to ask y'all the questions and let y'all talk. I'm excited about this discussion. Shaka, I'm going to come to you first. I'm going to ask you, and everybody's the same question, but I'm coming to Shaka first. The question is, why mass incarceration, brother? What brought you to this work in this intersection? And then on the spectrum of reform to abolition on mass incarceration, where do you stand and why?
Thank you so much for a really thoughtful and insightful question. What brought me to this is my actual incarceration. I went to prison in 1991 when I was 19 years old. I spent a total of 19 years in prison, 7 of those years in solitary confinement. And I was really fortunate to have a few things happen. One, I walked into prison literate, and that empowered me to actually read and reflect in a way that was meaningful and transformative. However, that wouldn't have happened if I wouldn't have had incredible mentors, men who are currently dying in prison, who have been in prison for over 4 decades, mentored me in a way that is beyond anything I've experienced. And I have some incredible people in my life to this day, you know, and across a lot of the power sectors in the world, who I also consider mentors. But the men who mentor me on the inside, you know, their power and their ability to transform a young life into meaning and purpose really is what led me to this work. And that work actually started in prison. I've been out of prison now for 10 years, but I was doing organizing in prison. I got into a lot of trouble in prison for organizing. I've ended up in solitary confinement and conflict with the administration. However, you know, I knew that what was important to me is to stand up for my humanity and the humanity of the brothers that I was incarcerated alongside. And so I was always, you know, willing to take whatever the consequences were. And the reason I was able to do that is because I explained to my father that there's a strong possibility that I will never leave prison because I'm always going to choose my humanity over injustice. And so I've been in this work for a very long time. I understand the systemic nature of what leads people to incarceration. Also understand the historical aspect of why we have mass incarceration, which is rooted in the 13th Amendment. Our beautiful sister Ava DuVernay did a profound job at articulating that in her film 13th, which I'm also fortunate to be a part of. But that loophole that says involuntary servitude should no longer exist except for those who are subject to, you know, prison, basically, create a loophole to ensure that a new form of slavery, a new form of servitude and free labor would exist. And so when you look into prisons across the country, you'll see people working for, you know, 17 cents an hour, which was where I started at in prison, and oftentimes free in some states. And it's one of the reasons that, you know, we have recidivism rates that are 70%. I just looked at the unemployment rate in society, and it's pretty high specifically for Black males. But when you go inside prison, there's a 100% employment rate, which means that once you step through those doors, they're going to find a way to employ you. And so that's what leads me to the work. In regards to where I stand on the spectrum of reform and abolition, I'm realistic about living in a capitalist society. Where there's capitalism, there will always be prisons. And the work that I do in terms of reform is based on the reality that I lived, and understanding that we can bring people home now who have been subjected to incarceration because mental illness has been criminalized. And when you begin to go into depth in regards to why our prison system exists and who's actually in prison, the levels of trauma that exist in our community, the adverse childhood experiences that exist in our community, when you begin to peel back the layers on that, you understand that the majority of people who wouldn't be in prison if these systemic structures weren't in place. So through the process of reform and eradicating some of these structures, you know, that leads to the ultimate goal of abolishment. However, what I believe, do I believe in our lifetime prisons will be abolished? I don't think so. I would hope so, and I can be optimistic and idealistic, but understanding the roots of capitalism and how it works to keep people impoverished, and understanding that poverty, mental illness, addiction are root causes that leads people, you know, to prison, which is up under this larger umbrella of systemic racism rooted in the enslavement of our ancestors. And so as we work toward abolishing prisons, we also have to be mindful to work toward deconstructing some of these things that are impediments and can actually bring people home. And lastly, I'll say this: I worked alongside some of the most incredible organizations and thought leaders on criminal justice reform in the country. I've worked with Cut 50, you know, which was founded by Van Jones and Jessica Jackson and Matt Haney. I've worked with Anti-Recidivism Coalition. I've partnered with Reform Alliance. And I can tell you that the work that they led and I contributed to get the First Step Act passed was no small undertaking. And while it's not a comprehensive reform bill, it was a step in a direction that has brought thousands of people home. And, you know, the reality is what it did is it signaled to the world that there's a ton of work we have to do, but we have to start somewhere. And so it's the reason I continue to do the work that I do. And I work alongside anybody. I don't really care whether it's reform or abolitionism. I'm just about like, can we bring our people home? And while they are incarcerated, can we ensure that they aren't being abused, that they aren't being, you know, dehumanized by being subjected to solitary confinement with no out dates? That's one of the things that people don't think about. When I went to solitary, there was no, hey, you're going to be here for 30 days or 60 days. It's an indeterminate sentence that allows you to be left in there until they decide to let you out. And so, you know, my work is rooted in the reality of bringing my friends home. They inspire me. I talk to them weekly, and, you know, working alongside incredible thought leaders and visionaries like, you know, my co-panelists here.
I appreciate you so much. You just lifted a lot that I'm going to ask you about in a little bit. But the connection between capitalism, racism, and the predatory practices of putting people in prisons, and how your fundamental value is just making sure that we get our people out. Like, I know there's a vision for abolition. I know there's a vision for reform, but at the end of the day, how many people can we bring home right now? And I appreciate you grounding us in not only that core value, but that reality of right now. You talked about a lot of policy. We're going to get to that in a second. Thank you so much. I'm going to come to you next, Cynthia. I want to hear from you. Tell us why mass incarceration, why deportations. I read it a little bit in your bio. And then where do you sit on that spectrum? Of course, your value set might be a little different because of the nature of the work you do. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, and thank you, Shaka. I think that was really encompassing a lot and grounding a lot of the work that we are tapping in. I think as United We Dream, our goal has always been like the releasing of immigrant communities from detention. But we can't do that work if we're not acknowledging the racism and the prison industrial complex that already exists, right, to perpetrate violence and the punishment system that is really ingrained in the United States and worldwide. Like, abolition is not just something that is rising and continues to happen in conversations in the United States, but it's really about how also we are part of a broader community that needs to drive away from punishment like accountability. And so for me, it was impossible to sit here and talk about the abolishment of ICE, knowing that, you know, ICE has been here for a decade or so, and that's not at the core of what has created this broader system, right? Like, we know that there is private detention centers. We know that the best and the fastest way in which this system feeds immigrants into the prison and to deportation pipeline is through actually, you know, law enforcement collaboration, through the police encounters. And so we know and understand that they're utilizing that tool and that method to really impact the way our communities are surviving in the world as we know it. And I think that for me, abolition is the end goal, but I also understand, you know, as Shaka mentioned, we are in a moment where we are in survival mode. And so it is, how many people can we stop from going into detention? How many people can we get released? But also, what is the work and the organizing that we're doing behind getting people to not continue to be funneled into detention, to not be funneled into prison? And that will take all of our communities, and also the acknowledgement that there is racism and the dehumanizing of people at the very core of the systems. And we know that that has happened since the genocide of indigenous people, since slavery, and that was literally transformed through the 13th Amendment. And so until that is not completely eradicated, there's always going to be a group of people that are going to be targeted. And so the organizing part of that for us is bringing all communities together and reimagining what that community system looks like, where we're not punishing each other when things are missing or when we are not having our needs myth, because we know during COVID-19 that has even been more clear, like clearer than ever. When our community lacks the resources, that is when we're having sort of a collapse completely. And so being able to all sit at the table and say, like, all of us are impacted by the system in different waves and in different conditions, but at the core of it is the same system. It is a system that values only how much we can provide for it, and it continues to erase us from the equation. And so I think that the long-term vision is creating communities that are healthy, that are well-funded and resourced, that where we are putting people's humanity and holistic approach to the way that we're healing, and not just to the way that we're holding people accountable to punishment. Because we know that folks who are harming other people more than likely have experienced harm. And so in order for us to move forward, we have to be our holistic full selves to be able to create those communities that thrive.
Thank you, Cynthia. This is so necessary. I mean, I know a lot of folks say that they read books. And so, during the pandemic and the lockdown, I've taken a lot of time to read. And similar to what you and Shaka just shared around the racism and the dehumanization of bodies of people, you uplifting and bringing back to say, listen, we have to think about people's whole selves, not just like the numbers, not just the data, not just the system, the privatization of it and the system, but we got to make sure we care about people's whole self, their humanity, their freedom, like you said, their health, especially right now in this moment. So I really appreciate you for uplifting that. Okay. And then last but not least, of course, Salim. Brother, how did you get into this work? I read it a little bit in your bio. You and I just met, last week on the phone for the first time? I'm really excited about learning more from you and the work that you do. Talk to us a little bit about how you got into doing this work as executive director now of the Abolition Law Center, and where you sit on that spectrum from reform to abolition.
I think, as people could surmise from our name, the Abolitionist Law Center, that's not a catchy name. We mean that. We're serious about that. Unfortunately, myself, what brought me to this work was that at the age of 16 years old, I was sentenced to spend the rest of my life in prison. I was facing a death sentence, but the court settled on a life without parole sentence for me for being a 16-year-old accomplice to a drug-related homicide that happened on my birthday in North Philadelphia in 1990. I served 27 years in prison, a little bit over 10, 11 of that in solitary confinement. I think my longest stretch in solitary confinement was 3 years in the special management unit in the mid-90s, when mass incarceration was really taking off and prisons were a maximum security prison was not sufficient. They had to come up with a new term, and that was a supermax prison. And at the age of 21, I found myself buried in a special management unit in a supermax prison in Western Pennsylvania, over 200 miles away from my home. I was very fortunate, though, that during my incarceration, because I did a lot of my time in a hole, because one, I came in 16 years old, and when you come into a prison system at 16 years old, you really have two options. And one is you either be rebellious and act out, or you keep your head down and you get devoured. And so I chose to act out. My humanity, my dignity was very important to me. However, during my stints in the hole, I had the fortune of running into political prisoners in Pennsylvania like Russell Maroon Schultz, Mumia Abu-Jamal, Joseph Jojo Bowens. These men were members of the Black Panther Party and the Black Liberation Army. And I really find it a form of vindication that today I'm on this panel talking about ending mass incarceration at a moment when all across this country, people are taking to the streets to demand an end to state violence in the form of police terror, police brutality. That brutality also exists behind bars, but those men in Pennsylvania, those political prisoners, have been in prison 50 years ago for responding to this moment 50 years ago in 1968, 1969, and 1970 in Philadelphia. They fought the racist Frank Rizzo, and many of them are still in prison. So I want to ground us in that moment right now while we're on this call in this national uprising, that there are people across this country, political prisoners, who have been in prison for decades for responding to this call during their generation, and we owe it to them to make sure we lift their voices up. Where I fall in the spectrum now of abolition versus reform, I'm very serious about this. I'm not going to beat my head on techniques and tactics that we've tried in the past and have failed. I was on a call the other day with the city because we're suing them about a police assault on West Philadelphia, where the police unleashed tear gas, rubber bullets on an entire residential community in West Philadelphia because protesters were taking to the streets and took to the intersections because of the death of George Floyd. That every proposal, every policy recommendation that a lot of the politicians, mind you, politicians that look like us on this call, were advocating for, were the same policy recommendations minus body cameras that Philadelphia politicians in 1968 during a riot in North Philadelphia over police brutality advocated. You could go back to Rodney King. We could go back to the Kerner Commission. We could go back to Watts, right? We've been constantly on this treadmill of reform, and it has gotten us nowhere. And the same applies to mass incarceration. I applaud the efforts of liberating one human being from a cage as an abolitionist. I applaud that. And I certainly understand that there is no contradiction between reform and abolition. At a lot of times, I'm in the same room with people who are pushing reform. I'm actually a lot of times in the room talking to people across the table that under any other circumstances in life, I wouldn't even want to be in the same room with. But I understand that when we're talking about decarceration, which is a word that I really think that we should start replacing mass incarceration with, when we start talking about decarceration, unfortunately, a lot of times it plays out like a hostage drama, like hostage negotiations. So we have to go into this room, put cards on the table. And I'm one who doesn't like that because at one time I was one of those hostages, right? I was a kid who was written off at the age of 16, and had it not been for people who were demanding the impossible, because Pennsylvania, all life sentences in Pennsylvania are life without parole. The city of Philadelphia had over 360 children sentenced to spend the rest of their life in prison. No other city in the country had sentenced more youth to spend the rest of their life in prison. The overwhelming majority were Black and brown youth, and the state of Pennsylvania had over 500 children sentenced to spend the rest of their life in prison. We were written off, and it was said it's impossible for y'all to come home. Pennsylvania is a hardline state, but we kept pushing. So for me, I'll be very straight. I'm in the spectrum of abolition. At the same time, I'll work with reformists, but I'm going to be the one that's going to keep kicking that door down further. I'm going to be the one that keeps pushing for more. And also, too, we cannot talk about mass incarceration without talking about its connection to the disempowerment of Black communities and Black and brown communities. It's not a coincidence that in 1971, the United States total prison population was at around 250,000 people. Today, it's well over 2 million. Mass incarceration arose as Black empowerment and Black participation in the political process rose. It was a way to get back at gains that our communities have made from the civil rights struggle. And it was also put in place to check the aspirations of the Black liberation movement, the Black power movement. So I really think that we need to ground ourselves into that and understand the type of opposition that we face when we talk about ending mass incarceration. Because if it was just about letting people out of cages, we would not see the entrenched opposition that we see today. Unfortunately, it's racialized, it's rooted, it's driven by systematic poverty and disenfranchisement. So there's a lot of connections there, and we have a long way, a long fight ahead of us in order to get to abolition. And again, abolition is something we aspire to. And prison abolition is not an anomaly. We believe, and to be an abolitionist, you can't say we just want to abolish prisons tomorrow. That's not going to happen.
That's right.
Prisons are not an anomaly in America. We are ultimately going to have to abolish the American social contract in order to abolish prisons. That's just the reality.
That's right. Speak on it. Listen, the gems that you dropped. I want to also plug that this year marks the 10-year anniversary of Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow. And that is a really good book for anybody watching who wants to get more information around the pieces that Salim just mentioned. It's not just the criminal justice system, but all the pieces entrenched in it that you connected back to the community, and how the community then is targeted specifically to fund this cruel system, this caste system. You talked about dropping the word decarceration so that we don't say mass incarceration, because we have to have an agenda. And to what everyone said so far, there has to be a long-term agenda and a short-term agenda. Right now, we can get people out. And in the future, we can say our long-term agenda is abolition. And those things, like you said, Salim, are not in contradiction to each other. I think we spend a lot, I put this at my Instagram bio. I said, we need less rhetoric and more calculation. Because people like to sit at the table and fight whether or not abolition versus reform. And I'm like, well, can we free somebody right now, right? Like, that's what we need to focus on. So you even laying that out for folks, I know was super helpful, especially for me. So I want to ask each of y'all one specific question, and then we're going to transition to see if we can get questions from the audience that are tuning in on all the platforms. Shaka, I'm going to come to you again first. My first question to you is, you mentioned, and congratulations, you said 10 years you've been free, and you're celebrating your freedom as of June 22nd, after serving 19 years in prison. And you have been pioneering this movement around redemption, right? And when you talked about humanity and flipping the script so that we don't think about people as objects or numbers or things or property, we think about them as humans. And what does redemption look like? So I'd like for you to tell us what that means as a framing. And then also, what else do we need to do to unlearn and learn about the caste system that exists as you start to help us rethink how to talk about this?
Yeah, first of all, I just want to acknowledge my colleagues on this platform. It feels amazing to hear Salim's voice and Cynthia's voice. And the reason why I think it's so important to acknowledge them is the 10 years I've been out of prison, I have been on every platform, every stage that you can imagine. And it's not often that it's people who have actually been impacted by the injustices that we're fighting, that's speaking and advocating with an eloquence and an intelligence and an insight that I know to be true. From my experience, as Salim mentioned, you know, those brothers, those political prisoners behind bars are educators, they're teachers, they are architects of wisdom and love and uplift in a way that our people can't even begin to imagine. And so it manifests through our work. Like, we wouldn't be here without them. And when I speak of redemption, you know, in these conversations, oftentimes the personal responsibility and accountability isn't often articulated, because it's not people who have been directly impacted who are speaking for us or on behalf of us. You know, I killed a man at 19 years old, and we can dismantle all the structures, all the systems. There's still a personal accountability. There's a personal experience that I wake up to every day when I see a mother crying in tears because her son has been shot down in the streets, and knowing and recognizing and acknowledging that I made a family feel like that. There is some soul healing that is required, that has been a perpetual part of my process. It's one of the reasons that I wrote the book, Righting My Wrongs, because I really wanted people to understand what happens to young people who make that decision. You know, I was 19 years old when I pulled that trigger. I was 17 years old when I got shot. I was 16 years old when my older brother got shot. I was 15 when my oldest brother got shot. And so the level of gun trauma I experienced required some spiritual healing. The level of trauma that I inflicted on my community requires some personal accountability. And those things are not diametrically opposed. They're part of the process. This work is rooted in love. It's rooted in passion. It's rooted in hope and understanding that my life could have had very different outcomes if there was something different in place to address adverse childhood experiences, the abuses that I suffered in my community, in my own home, things that we don't like to talk about as a people when we're talking about dismantling systems. There's also aspect of the system that we've actually adopted as a normative way of addressing, correcting children in our community. I was beat as a child. And in turn, I went out my doors and inflicted that same pain onto other people in my community. And so that healing for our people has to take place, right? The reason that so many of us who have been system impacted do this work, and we're so passionate, and we're so dedicated and committed, is because we know without a doubt that our life could have had and produced different outcomes. And so when I talk about redemption, I'm talking about holistic. You can't redeem a system if your only emotional response to that system is anger. Anger is a part of the process, as we should be disgusted with the level of injustice that we're faced with. But there's also deep compassion and empathy that we have to have for ourselves, that we have to have for our community, in a contributing factor. So as much as I'm an advocate, I'm also a mentor. I'm also a dad. I'm also a brother and a colleague and a friend. And so all of those things are instrumental into how I show up in the world consistently. And you can't have that with, you can't do this love-inspired work in this traumatic field and show up healthy and whole without actually going through that redemptive process. And this is not for paying a debt to society or some weird political structure. This is the personal redemption. This is the reconnecting with community. This is the love that I pour into my brothers and sisters and that they pour into me. And it's important to have that, and we can't do this work.
Can I ask you a quick question? I'm curious. So, because that journey that you're talking about of redemption, it's not something that we're taught in schools. And oftentimes we don't learn those values or that shifting in our families. And so I'm just wondering if you could name for us, if there is one thing, probably not, but if you can name for us, like, what was the confirmation that you understood redemption being something that you had to learn and go through? What was that process?
So real quickly, there were three things. One I mentioned earlier, which was the mentors, which led me to masterful books. Reading Malcolm X's autobiography, Assata Shakur, books on self-empowerment, As a Man Thinketh by James Allen. And then the second thing was the man whose life I was responsible for taking, the woman who raised him. She sent me this powerful letter and really told me who he was as a human being, the father that he was, the son that he was, the friend. And as much as I didn't want to read that letter, I knew I had to. And I wasn't even emotionally mature enough to process the forgiveness, the gift of forgiveness she had given me, and the grace. And it took years for me to mature to a point of really understand that. And the third thing was, I got this letter from my son, and he told me that his mom had told him while I was in prison. And so all of the mechanical identity that I had built up, being a hood savvy, street hustler, being a prison yard boss, like all those things came shattering to the ground, because in reality, I knew that I had failed my son as a father and as a man. And I had a responsibility to live my life in a way that exemplified what it means to be able to rise from the ashes and to lead in a way that will leave him no room to make excuses for whatever decisions he chose to make in life. And so those things are the drivers when you're talking about, the commitment. And it's the thing that, in that environment, my mentors, they leaned in when they could have easily walked away, or they could have, went to war with me. Instead, they leaned in because they saw something. They saw something that was redeemable. And they told me, one day you will get out and you will lead people. One day you will get out and you will be a different man, and you have the power and that ability in you, but you have to be willing to connect with it. And so to me, I pay homage to the men, the Gangster Al's, the Big Al's, the Tommy Seymour's, the men who raised me, who challenged my thinking, and whose life I fight on behalf of. So anywhere you see me, you see them. And so when I'm talking redemption, I'm talking about this deep, deep spiritual and emotional upheaval, because our ancestors were so traumatized by that experience, and that trauma was transmitted through our DNA. And I'll sum it up with this. In December, I went to Ghana, and I had this dream while I was in prison that I wanted to go to Ghana because I had read Malcolm X and Maya Angelou's work and W.B. Du Bois. And when I went, I thought that I was going to have this romanticized, experience of going back to the continent and touching the soil, and, I'm home. And what I actually realized is that when I got there and I was standing in a dungeon, slave dungeon, and I was actually in a woman's slave dungeon, and I could stretch my arms out, and touch the walls. And I was just inches from being able, my head to touch the ceiling. I'm only 5'9", 5'10" at best. And I realized this was a prison cell that I was in solitary, in the same dimensions, in the same mentality. And I realized that I owe my ancestors an apology because I forfeited the thing that they died for, they sacrificed and survived for, which was freedom. And so I stood in that moment and I apologized to the ancestors. And I realized there was a different awakening that was happening, and that I had to come back, you know, and really share these stories from a different lens. So, you know, it's a lot wrapped up in my work that's beyond social justice, social
we could talk
impact.
for a whole hour just with each of y'all, literally just with each of y'all talk for a whole hour.
Yeah, but I just wanted to share that. And you know, again, thank you to my colleagues. We haven't met in person that I can recollect, but I love y'all. Like a deep, deep personal love of struggle and upliftment. And to our people that's just watching, we got to stop leaning into people who don't know this work. You know, Cynthia, Salim, like, if you want to know what's going on, ask them. Like, don't ask your most popular rapper, your most popular social media influencer. Ask the people that actually live in this work, that do this work, that's committed to this work. We do this in our sleep because we lived it for real.
Shaka, thank you. Like I said, listen, we got 20 minutes left, so I want to make sure I get to Salim and Cynthia, but this is such a two things. One, I wanted people to also know y'all, right? Because I know y'all, and some of y'all I found through friends and so on and so forth. Shaka and I went to the same D-Nice party, 2 years ago? And so we haven't been able to hang out or talk and get to know each other since, but intentionally, every single person who's watching, I hope you're writing down everybody's first and last name, following them on social media, getting connected, and making sure that if you're especially in their city, or if they do national work like Cynthia, that y'all are able to connect with it, and international work like Shaka, you're able to connect with them. And like Shaka just said, and like I said in the beginning, we got to put the folks who are the experts at the front of this conversation to lead us. So Cynthia, I'm going to come to you next, sis. You tweeted, I did some research. You tweeted on September 2nd, and I actually follow your tweets, okay? So on September 2nd, you tweeted and said, ICE arrested 2,000 people through July and August, while countless of uninsured, undocumented folks get infected daily by COVID. While prisons deny our loved ones one of the most basic human rights and safety from the virus. And so you shared that publicly. Shaka just got finished talking about, like, not just redemption, but also how we all come to this work in love. And you mentioned, Cynthia, the holistic piece of making sure that we look at people's holistic issues and make sure we fix all of it. And so it's not just people got arrested, there's jobs, there's kids that are impacted by that, there's the help. Talk to us a little bit about the intersections of the detention centers and the fight against mass incarceration. I know that United We Dream is always called for the end of ICE, which is a new institution and needs to disappear. Not NAACP, I'm saying that. Even though we're trying to get the NAACP to get there, everybody watching. So talk to us a little bit about the intersections of that. This is the platform for it, sis. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, totally. And, you know, the privilege is mine to be able to share space with you, Salim and Shaka. So thank you again. I'm super grateful. And I also want to bring to the space the Black women in Oklahoma who have taught me just so much about the struggle that we share and where we all come to the table. And, you know, the organizing pieces, they're not usually just there unless you're looking for them, because the system is set out to make our issues feel like they run in different lanes. But the reality is, it's just different funnels of the same system. And so I think what was really clear to me, and I didn't link the article that ICE actually released about how many people they had detained, because to me this highlights what has been the biggest reality of this country. And the reality is that in the midst of a global pandemic, we have failed to provide anyone the basic needs and resources to protect themselves and to protect their families. And so I think what was really clear is that we failed to provide universal income for families who have lost their jobs so that they don't have to pick between getting exposed to a deadly virus or go put food on the table, right, and attending their job. But there was enough funding to continue to run operations of ICE to pick up immigrant families, which we know are also being completely dehumanized by the detention centers just for private investors and for this system to continue to funnel money through erasing the livelihood of immigrants in this country. And so I think that what really angered me, and I'm gonna touch on the piece about the anger and the radical love that I think that abolition and this work really brings us together, is that it angered me that since March until now, we continue to be deemed as essential workers, as essential part of the process of getting the country going, right? You see in the wildfires on the West Coast, and you see farm workers with completely orange skies, still picking up fruit, still working the fields. And somehow this is seen as heroic, but there's nothing heroic about dying on the fields just because you have to. There's nothing heroic about immigrants dying in detention centers because their humanity is erased by their immigration status. And so for me, it was clear that we needed to highlight how the system continues to tell us there's never enough resources for our community when it comes to funding things that we need to survive. But there's always more money for more police budgets, for more surveillance. There is always more budgets for private contracts with, Core Civic or with another for-profit detention centers or prisons. And so I think that radical love at the root of this, right, of this organizing and really moving from an abolition lens, is that abolition calls for the imagination, but also the things that we can hold on to. And the things that we can hold on to is the humanity of people. And the humanity of people should not be tied to the contributions that they make to this country. It should not be tied to the things that they bring to the table. People, I always say, you're somebody. And it doesn't matter what you did or didn't do. At the end of the day, our community cannot survive if you're not having everyone come together and put their best radical love and imagination to really put forward the vision that we want to live. And I know that we talk about, maybe this moment will not get us to the end goal, but every single day, the things that we do, abolition is on our daily living. The way that we choose not to call the police, the way that we choose not to criminalize someone on the way that they look, the way that we choose to show up for folks that are literally losing their homes in the middle of a global pandemic, that is abolition. And if abolition is at the core of our daily actions, we are already setting up conditions for abolition to be successful for the next generation. And one thing that I thought was really beautiful is 50 years have brought us to this moment where the whole country is in a full awakening that we don't need more money for these agencies, that we don't need more policing for security and safety. And safety is knowing that people have a roof over their heads, that have food on the table, that they're getting the mental health support that they need, and that doesn't come tied with more policing or enforcement. That is the radical love that we need, to be able to say, when someone has perpetrated harm, we understand that that person's humanity is not going to be erased by that. That they're still somebody's son, they're still somebody's brother, you're still my neighbor, you're still my community. And so I think that the intersection of our work is seeing that while our issues may not be all coming at the table right away, is that I need to know that when it comes to detention centers, we know Black immigrants are left there to fend for themselves longer than any other community. That we know when there is budget expansions for the police, that immigrants are going to be funneled through that pipeline on local police enforcement. And that there is a really clear message that says police and ICE is the same shit twice. We mean that. We mean that, and we see it every day in our work. So we can't talk about the abolishment of ICE without talking about the defunding of the police and ending policing, because of the very core of it all is to erase the humanity of people.
Cynthia, thank you. I'm going to uplift some of these key words that you brought up, because I think people get so caught. I know people do. I don't think people get so caught up in believing what we're told. And then we also get so caught up in the dog whistling, right? That criminalizes people. And that traps us from being able to think about the words imagine, humanity, love, safety. And I think those are super important, because if we're not focused on what we know to be true and is the foundation and the core of the work that we're doing, then we'll continue to try to fight for some people and not fight for everybody. And so I'm so glad you said that. Thank you so much. I'm going to come to you, Salim, next. Here's my question, brother. As of August, congratulations. I said this already privately, but I'm saying it again publicly. Congratulations, you just became the new executive director for the Abolition Law Center. So congratulations to you on your new role. The ALC litigates on behalf of people whose human rights have been violated in prison. It educates general public about the evils of mass incarceration, and it works to develop a mass movement against the American punishment system, which I really love how that's phrased, giving me new language, by building alliances and nurturing solidarity across social divisions. Talk to us about how the rights of young people have been violated. You mentioned earlier what was going on in not only Pennsylvania, but in Pittsburgh, and what changes have happened in the right direction. What I really want you to do, brother, is help us figure out and give people answers to like things that they should be putting on the top of their agenda. Because I don't want people to leave this panel and say, I know I should put people who are directly impacted at the center of the conversation. If there's somebody who wants to work on or is already working on it, I want to make sure they're doing it right. So give us some of that.
Well, just let me touch on a few things, and I kind of want to keep it centered in this moment. And Cynthia brought some really good things up around defunding policing. We have a long ways to go when it comes to how we punish people in this country, because we mete out a lot of things in this country: punishment, torture, discipline, retribution, but we don't administer justice. And for me, as someone from the streets of Philadelphia, and I feel like I always have to bring this up, even though I really don't like to bring it up. You know, I'm someone that went to prison for being involved in a homicide, but I'm also someone that lost 2 family members to street violence, right? And a lot of times in this country, there's that wall in our community between offender and victim, as if we don't know each other. The reality is that violence, harm, mass incarceration, and the punishment regime weave through all of our communities. It weaves through every family in the community. We don't leave our neighborhoods to harm people. You know, the reality is we harm people in our neighborhoods or in the neighborhood right down the block. That's why I really hate that term black on black violence. It's almost like black people are expected to be the only people that do not harm people that look like them. If you look all over this country, people are most likely to be harmed by people who look like you and who live in your neighborhood. And in our communities, that harm is based on a lack of resources. When people are disenfranchised, when people are poor, they're going to fight for resources. And unfortunately, for a lot of youth, the resources that are most readily available to them, a lot of them, is the drug game, which, you know, I could tell you is no game. And I'm sure Shaka and many other people who are listening on this call could also talk to that. But I think we need to start talking about harm and violence in our community as a community issue, not an issue of that's them over there, that's these few bad apples over there. And when we're talking about defunding police in Philadelphia, for me, one of the things that I've really been trying to lift up is that our communities have always been advocating defunding police. This ain't nothing new to us. We've always been asking for more resources to go to the communities and advocates that are doing violence interruption, that are being mentors in our community, that we want more money to go into our schools. So these are things that our communities have been advocating for decades. And I think that's something that people who are listening on this broadcast should think about starting to advocate and lift up. Because a lot of times when we talk about defunding police, I can understand someone in North Philadelphia, which is one of the most violent parts of Philly. When you hear defunding police, people start thinking about, oh, you're going to take police from North Philly. I could tell you that a lot of people up there could already tell you the police ain't up here. However, these communities are the most over-policed, but they also have the highest rates of harm. They also have the highest rates of violence. They also have the highest rates of incarceration. So they should be the safest communities in the city. And actually, America, the way we incarcerate people and the way we police should be the safest country in the world if mass incarceration and over-policing worked. So it doesn't. So we want people to start advocating for it. And when they start hearing the word defund the police, we want them to associate that with fund our communities, fund our schools, fund our children. We know about the school to prison pipeline, right? We want our schools to be adequately funded. We want after school mentors, because there's someone that was in the streets. I know that when Ronald Reagan came in, I was a young boy. I remember all of the budget cuts that shut down all the rec centers in North Philadelphia, right? So the rec center that was in my neighborhood that had a gym in it, and it had people from our neighborhood working there, mentoring youth and actually taking care of the neighborhood, they were laid off. The rec center was shut down. What did it become? It became the hub for the corner. That's where we hung out. That's where we sold drugs. That's not just my neighborhood. That played a part in neighborhoods all across this country. So when we're talking about defunding police, we want to make sure that people get it in their head that we're advocating more money come to our communities, more money come to the grassroots advocates who are making the difference, who can actually go out there and reach what you would call the shooters, reach the trouble pockets in our neighborhood, because the police can't reach them. That's just a reality. I don't care how many police they pour into that section of the city. They're not going to be able to release them. So I think that's very important, that we start advocating and demanding more resources to our community. And last but not least, and look, I got to put this on the table because this is the NAACP convention. We need to start holding our politicians accountable and start calling them out for some of the ridiculous nonsense that comes out of their mouth. When they start talking about defunding the police is something that the white left is pushing, when they start talking about their constituents aren't advocating for defunding the police, and when they try and sidestep accountability for a lot of their failures, we need to call them out, because that's something that has been harming us too. We've been given a lot of our own passes, and the type of leaders that I could tell you that my aunts in the civil rights movement, when they marched, they weren't marching for no sellouts, right? Back in the 60s, when they went down to Freedom Summer, when my aunts went to hear Dr. King speak in Washington, they didn't go down there for Wilson Good, who would drop a bomb on a house full of Black children when he was when he's Philadelphia's first mayor, right? They wasn't marching for politicians like that. They weren't going down there marching for politicians who, when the crack epidemic was raging through our neighborhoods, had the nerve to say things like, well, that's poor family. Those are single mothers who aren't taking care of their babies. Or if police brutality occurs on a brother, well, he should have pulled his pants up. If he didn't dress like that, that wouldn't have happened to him. See, no, we weren't marching. My aunts, my family, and I know that the movement, they weren't marching for that, right? We could have just kept in the crackpots that were in power. So we didn't get all these gains to put Black faces in power who were going to be either just as unreceptive to our communities as the races that preceded them, or be condescending to us when we're advocating for real structural change. So I think that's something that we really need to uplift, because the status quo has got to go, right? And to be honest with you, America been dropped the status quo. We see who's president. That's not an anomaly, right? There ain't no status quo in this country anymore. And if you're looking for the status quo in this country, if you're looking to go back to what it was, if you're looking for what it was under Clinton, what it was under Obama, even God forbid what it was under Bush, because when you look at who we got in power now, Bush almost looks like a liberal, right? So if you're looking to go back to that status quo, I'm sorry to tell you that those days are gone. Oh. So we should start reimagining and demanding more, because the country has moved on. The question is, are we going to move on with it? And specifically, that is a call to our advocates and also a lot of our politicians.
Thank you. And not only are we going to move on, but where are we going to go? And that's our responsibility, right? For folks to be able to determine what that looks like, which is why Cynthia was talking about imagine, because we don't have to just get on the train and ride the train. We can actually redirect the whole, the whole mother effing thing, right? We want to be able to move it. And so this, y'all are going to see a lot of tweets after this, because I can't tweet while we're doing it while I'm moderating, but I'm just letting y'all know I'm writing down all the quotes and stuff from what y'all are saying. And you said my auntie was not marching for no sellouts. I love this, because we see a lot of marches going on. And there's a lot of folks who are comfortable with the system, right? Comfortable with the narrative, comfortable with being, we're just going to fall in line. And so y'all's ability to challenge people today, this evening, is really, really encouraging, because sometimes there's a lot of folks who feel that way, but feel trapped in the box because they feel like they're the only one who might think about being a revolutionary, being different. And so y'all being able to let them know that, listen, if we're gonna ask better for America, well, not ask, we're gonna demand for a better America, this is what it has to look like. So thank you, Salim, for that. Listen, we got 4 minutes left, okay? So I'm gonna do a speed round in 2 minutes. I'm gonna give y'all 1 minute to tell everybody how to follow y'all, and then I'm gonna tell everybody that this is coming to an end. Okay, does that work? So here's a 2-minute speed round, speed, fast, okay? Salim, question for you that came from somebody said, a lot of people from YouTube and Facebook. They said, can you say the name of your book again, please? And show it to them. Come on, show us the book. They want to know what it is.
That's Shaka. I believe that's going to
Shaka.
Shaka.
I said Salim. I'm sorry. I said Shaka. Sorry. Shaka, go ahead, brother.
Get that plug on. Right My Wrongs. New York Times bestseller, hot in these streets for 4 years straight.
Love it, love it, love it. Read the title for folks who weren't able to see the picture.
So the title is Righting My Wrongs, Life, Death, Redemption in American Prison. I actually originally self-published this and sold it out the trunk, and then it caught mainstream success when Oprah read one of those original out the trunk joints. So get that, it's Oprah approved, New York Times bestseller.
Thank you. So I have a question from YouTube coming from Rose Holmes. Thank you for tuning in. The question, I think I might send this to you, Salim. I am stuck at the, quote, the 6-year-old in the detention center, end quote. What can one truly say to this child to give them a sense of hope and trust?
I believe that's for Cynthia. That's related to a detention center. Sorry, I think.
Oh, I said detention. I keep trying to send you questions, brother. Cynthia, go ahead.
I think the hope here is that when communities organize, when we fight back, we win. And we're not looking to just release someone from detention. We're looking to actually dismantling the system. And it doesn't matter if you're a 6-year-old, it doesn't matter if you just arrived at the border, it doesn't matter if you don't have a pathway to citizenship like I do. I don't have that, and my parents don't have that. And so the fight is not just to release one person. I can guarantee you there's a parent, someone related to that child that is probably in adult detention, also wondering how they can get their child out of detention. And so in a system that allows a 6-year-old to be detained, does not have a place in a society where our communities are thriving. And so if you can't get that image out of your head, then that means we have to organize, because there's probably children and youth in prison, in detention centers, in foster care that are being pipelined into the prison system. And so organizing, fighting back, and making sure that at the core of all these conversations are people directly impacted. Sometimes the healing is not about healing others, but holding the space for people to come together and fight back.
Thank you, Cynthia. That goes back to what you all were saying earlier, not just about the folks who are directly impacted, but also, Shaka, you mentioned it earlier, mentors who were able to then also lead you through the organizing and through the work. And I wish we could talk about it, we don't have time. You mentioned earlier in the beginning that even organizing while you were locked up was problematic and you were getting in trouble for it. And so to the question, like you said, Cynthia, supporting a young person who wants to get involved in this work, we got to then ask them, well, what do you want to do about it? How do you want to change it? What if we had to reimagine it, what would it look like? And give them the agency to determine what that future looks like. And then they might feel hopeful. Great question, Rose. Thank you. All right. Salim was helping me moderate because I was messing up. Salim, now I really got a question for you. It comes from Mike Lou Voldo. I'm sorry. It came from YouTube. The question is, why can't we come up with a different term instead of defund the police? You were just talking a lot about that. They want to use a different term. Talk to us. What you think?
I mean, we certainly could. We could fund our communities, invest in our communities. You know, that's one. You know, I'm really not. Well, I do understand the importance of narrative battle, and I can understand that term may strike some people the wrong way. So certainly we could use, invest in our communities, fund our communities as opposed to defund the police. So as long as we're capturing the substance of what we're asking for, I'm cool with that. And I think a lot of advocates are okay with that. I know in Philadelphia, we have been making a connection between investing in our communities, defund the police, because that's what we're asking for. We're asking for money to be moved from the police budget into community funds. And we're also asking for it to be done in an incremental fashion. So for those who are screaming, that's going to happen overnight, we understand this is not going to be done in the next budget cycle. A lot of the demands that we're asking are actually very basic. We're asking for a 25% decrease in the police budget over 5 years, 25% each year, and that money going into a community fund, and that money will be used to fund community organizers, advocates working in our community, mentoring youth, violence interrupters, people who could go into those trouble spots with credibility and speak to those brothers that's out there putting work in the streets, harming their communities. We're trying to get the lead and asbestos out of Philadelphia schools, which is crazy. We have schools in Philadelphia with trash bags over the water fountain because children cannot drink the water in those fountains, and entire floors sealed off with hazmat tape because there's asbestos in them. And also there's no air conditioning in many schools in Philadelphia. So we're asking that those are some of the things that we're talking about when we talk about defund police. The Philadelphia Police Department can spare a couple $1 million to go into our communities. It's a reasonable ask.
It's reasonable. It's also the right thing to do. And I know that America doesn't always do the right thing. This is why we're pushing them to do it. What we're simply asking is for folks to fund violence prevention, not criminalization, right? And we've seen that where people put their money where their mouth is and put their money where their priorities are. And so we're just asking to shift and alter the relationships of power so that our young folks and people who look like us don't have to go through what we've been going through. Listen, I wish we could be here for another hour. I really do. I'm actually going to ask y'all to go live with me or something so we can finish the conversation. Like we just got so much more to talk about. But I want y'all to give your name. I'm going to share your bios and stuff online so folks can find it. But tell people how they can stay in contact with you if they want to donate to your organization or follow you on social media. I'm going to give y'all 20 seconds together to give the plug. So Shaka, Cynthia, and then Salim, go ahead.
You can follow me on all social media, Shaka Senghor. I ain't hard to find.
I guess that makes me hard to find, but Cynthia Garcia, you can find me on Facebook, Instagram. I think my Twitter is Cynthia09XX, some random. I'm not a bot, I promise.
You can find me on Twitter and Instagram under Salim Holbrook, and on Facebook, Robert Salim Holbrook. And you could also follow the Abolitionist Law Center on Instagram and Twitter.
I can't thank y'all enough. Look, and get the book. Look, I can't thank y'all enough, for real. I know that there's a lot of tokenism that happens in the world, especially in the progressive movement. I know that there's a lot of conferences and a lot of panels. I know that y'all are busy, and I know that y'all are going through a lot personally in this moment. During the pandemic, I'm praying for you and your families that y'all are safe and well. I honor you all for joining us on the panel today, for dropping all the seeds and all the good info and all the knowledge and even some of the new vocabulary we can use to help us identify the intersections of the work we need to do. The NAACP, as long as I'm here, is going to make sure we're standing behind y'all in the fight. Let us know how we can be helpful. I love you all. God bless y'all. And thank y'all so much again for joining us on the panel today. Y'all be safe.
Peace.
Thank you. Enjoyed the panel with everybody. Everybody have a good night too. Appreciate y'all.
We'll stay connected, y'all. We'll stay connected.
Thank you.
For sure. Love is
Peace,
love.
family.
So, good evening. I am proud to have our guest today, Aloe Black. If you've ever heard her perform or heard his music, it is profound. Again, I'm Derek Johnson, President and CEO of the NAACP. Aloe, welcome to the 111th NAACP convention.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to speak with you.
So, you know, we were excited when we learned from your team you wanted to participate. Why is this moment important for you in terms of social justice?
This is a big moment. So when I got involved in music as a career, I made a promise that I would use my voice for positive social transformation in whatever way that I can. So I consider myself an activist and an an artivist. And the murder of George Floyd by the police in Minneapolis was a breaking point for a lot of folks. Of course, Black folks, people of color, have experienced the injustice from police for centuries. But a lot of people in other communities, white folks, started recognizing how serious this issue is, because finally they had, video evidence that was complete from beginning to end, where they could see a man being murdered who was not fighting. It doesn't even matter if he was fighting. The fact that he was murdered for no reason really incensed them and incensed us all. I thought, with this moment, I could take my access to audience, my access to influence, my access to corporate America, and try to create a movement to build awareness around what kind of changes can be made. The movement for Black Lives is doing so much work to spread awareness and to demand these changes. And all of the constituent parts of this movement for Black Lives have to be working tirelessly, vigilantly, because evil never sleeps. So what I've chosen as my role in this moment is to identify the pieces in the puzzle that make the most sense, or have the biggest potential for dramatic change, or really a fundamental change in the culture around policing. And so
many in white America, they were shocked, right? For those of us who live as Black in America, we were not as shocked. Have you ever had a negative police encounter that you strongly believe it was based on race?
Absolutely. My first encounter was 9 years old. A police officer came to my door saying that someone in the neighborhood thought that I stole their bike. Turned out to be a 4-year-old kid who, I don't even know how they could properly interrogate or question a 4-year-old to get any answers, asking the 4-year-old, was it a white person or a Black person? And the 4-year-old's like, yes, but how do you know what they're answering to, right? So I have a policeman at my door telling me I stole a bike. I've been home all day and haven't been outside. That was one of those moments where I started to feel fear of police. When you're growing up as a kid, you think, oh, okay, well, the police are here to save me and keep me safe. And if I need them, I can call them. But I had a police officer telling me that I stole a bike and asking me why I was nervous and why was my mouth dry.
And you was 9.
And I was 9. This is a whole full-grown adult, right?
And where did you grow up? Where did you grow up?
I grew up in the suburbs, an hour south of Los Angeles, a place called Laguna Hills, predominantly white neighborhood. So that certainly puts an accent on this moment, right? Orange County.
Yeah. It wasn't South Central in the 80s or 90s. It was Orange County, California, not the hood, not old Oakland, right?
Right. So, for me, having experience being one of a handful of African Americans in my neighborhood, I got to see the difference as I grew up and got into the hip hop culture, traveling to different areas around Southern California and recognizing not everywhere is the same. There are huge disparities in these different neighborhoods. The neighborhood I grew up in, a lot of homeowners, so which means a lot of property taxes, which means a lot of money going to the school district.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the neighborhoods where I would hang out with my friends to freestyle or make beats and make music, you know, a lot of renters. So high population density, low property ownership tax going to school districts, a divestment in the communities from, you know, the what I recognize as the flight of industry from central Los Angeles and South Central, so to speak. The oversaturation of liquor stores and complete disparity when it comes to the kind of jobs that are available in the neighborhood. These things were starkly present to me in high school, and I could see the difference. I understood it. I think a lot of that stuff at that age politicized my lyrics, made me think consciously about my presence and what I could do with my voice.
So you think about the moment when you were 9 being interrogated by police because a 4-year-old said you stole a bike. Growing up in what you just described, high school, and now being a father of 2 kids, right? What do you tell your kids in this moment when they get of age? And when do you begin to talk to them about the nature of being an African American in this society?
So the conversation, I think, is happening in a way where my wife and I are traveling a lot. My kids understand that my parents' heritage is Panama. So what they learn about Blackness is not necessarily just African American. They're going to learn the diaspora.
Yeah.
A couple of summers ago, we spent in Tunisia. So they got to see and experience North Africa. They have been with us to the Caribbean islands, and they've seen Blackness from the Caribbean islands. We've gone to Cuba. We did an entire rumba course, learning about the drumming, the music. So what they get to understand about Blackness first is this concept of culture, this concept of greatness, this concept of vastness, right? I think as they get older, they're going to learn, because the curriculum in the United States is going to teach them about the history of oppression and the oppressive nature of colonialism coming from Europeans across to the triangle trade. But for now, what I want them to embody and understand and learn is their greatness, the amount of difference there is across the world in Blackness. They know that I've been to Ghana and Kenya and South Africa. They know that there is more to Blackness than what they see here in the United States. That said, my daughter's name is Mandela. We named her purposefully. She is not going to be a stranger to activism. She's not going to be a stranger to the fight for freedom. But for right now, I want her to learn about Blackness from the stance of strength, dignity, beauty, before the school system tells her about everything else. And we certainly will be there to guide those conversations as they happen and probably preempt them. I'm certain we will preempt.
You know, I love that story. All of my children have African names, and my second oldest son, after his sophomore year in school, he was able to go to South Africa. So a program he found, he flew there, went to Cape Town, a little suburb outside of Cape Town. And when he got situated, he called, he said, I can't believe this, where I don't see the Africans, you know. And he was really upset because it was one of those those enclaves, and they have been exposed. But having that African diaspora world view of empowerment becomes so important, which then takes us into this moment, this political space that we are in, where we're seeing peaceful protests in the street with this proclamation, this value statement, a factual statement that Black Lives Matter. It's not a hashtag alone. It's not an organization and that's it. It's not a set of organizations. It's a statement of fact. And you see so many people who are outside of the African and African American community demonstrating peacefully in the streets. What does that say to you in this moment?
What it says to me is that we are at a very, very special time in history where change can be made. There is an entire generation that's going to metabolize all of this hate and all of this oppression, all of this, what I call the white heteronormative colonizer patriarchal mentality, right?
Wait, those a lot of big words. I'm used to those 2-syllable words. You use some big words there. Say that one more time there.
Yeah, this is the white heteronormative. Okay, so white heteronormative, saying that only heterosexuals are normal. Colonizer and patriarchal meaning male dominated, and colonizer, the mentality of Europeans. But we're not Europeans, all Europeans, just the history of Europe.
Right.
When slavery ended here in the United States in 1863, and in Texas in 1865 for Juneteenth, it had already ended in other places in the world, in Jamaica, probably 50 to 80 years earlier. I can't remember the exact dates. But then shortly after, right, 1884, 1885, the Berlin Conference in Europe, all the European heads of state got together and they put a map on the table and they started drawing lines through Africa saying, here, Belgium, you take that. Germany, you take that. Holland, you take that. France, you get that. And they all made a pact and said, we're not going to fight each other. We're just going to fight the Africans and take their land. And that's why you see thousands and thousands of years of thousands of tribes who had decided that their lands were based on geographical shapings of the land, mountainscapes, valleys, canyons, rivers, plains, where there were no straight lines. Now they are being grouped together. They speak wholly different languages. They have wholly different cultures, and they're being grouped together by color of skin only and being subjugated by these European oppressors. And this is why I use this phrase, because that phrase, I think, fully encapsulates what we are living under here in the United States. That mentality still exists, and it exists systematically and systemically within the organizations and the institutions like the police departments in the U.S.
You know, the vocalization of Africa can also be used around the vocalization of African Americans, and with the whole concept of race as a social construct. But as an entertainer, as a musician, a singer, you're not supposed to be in this space. Why would you want to use your platform in this moment? And what outcomes are you seeking to achieve?
You know, I think I chose this space because I have this mentality. When I graduated from university, I went to work as a business consultant. But I had to find myself after work writing rhymes and going on stage to perform. When I got laid off, I decided, I'd do some music for a couple of years. I'll go back and get a job or go back to school. But music kept choosing me. And because I have this voice, I made it my purpose to use it. And I started to seek out the kind of leadership that could help me understand. So I sit with Harry Belafonte for hours at a time to have conversations about how to use this platform and how he used his platform.
1 second. You can only sit with Mr. B for hours at a time because he's going to talk for hours at a time. I mean, That's that, and I'm cutting you off because some of the times I've had to sit with him. It's just like you got to be a sponge and sit there and just appreciate just the wealth of knowledge that he kind of oozes on you. So I can share with you that's a blessing to be able to sit with him. So go ahead. I'm sorry.
It's beautiful.
When you
And
said
that's,
hours at a time, that's the only way
that's
you can sit with him. Yeah.
that's the knowledge. So what he was able to do in normalizing Blackness in the United States is an important factor in my career, being able to sing and do the things that I do. You know, it all takes the legacy of those who came before us. But what I understood from him was, yes, he was in marches. He was on the front lines. He was in phone calls behind the scenes. He was in meetings trying to negotiate the relationship between Blacks and whites within the US. But above and beyond that, the work of an activist is not glamorous work, and it does not pay. There's no money in activism. So what I learned from him was make a hit song, go out and be popular, influence people, take your money and put it into the movement. You know, Martin Luther King had to pay for hotels. He had to pay for transportation from place to place. His family needed food on the table. Where did that money come from? And so these are the kinds of things that my wife and I, we engage ourselves in as we are part of the movements for this transformation that is going to show the real humanity amongst us.
You know, when you talk about Mr. B, I live in Mississippi, and he spent a lot of time here doing activism. And he spoke of using his platform to get other entertainers who were not a part of the African American community engaged, from Bob Dylan to Marlon Brando, and how he will either get them to do benefit concerts to raise money, or actually come and be on the ground in Mississippi or in Alabama, or you have it. Are you engaged in any activity like that with your counterparts who are not African American? And if so, how's that going?
Absolutely. We found huge allyship or co-conspiratorship from many of the white music industry elite, from the artists to the lawyers to the managers to executives within the business. There's a music artist coalition and there's a Black music artist coalition. And together we've been able to put letters to Congress, federal, national Congress, and then state Congress and state legislation to push for changes. We were able to help in building the awareness and urging New York's congressional body to pass legislation on 50A, which is a civil rights law that will make police misconduct records public because they were, sealed. We're working on here in California. We were working on before recess, pushing for Senate Bill 731 and 776. 776 will also make those records public here in California, but 731 does two special things. That's decertifies bad police, not the good ones, just the bad ones. So there shouldn't be a problem, right? And that we shouldn't get a fight from anyone on decertifying bad cops. And it also eliminates the immunity for police. And this is the most important, in my opinion, the most important piece that everybody needs to get today, and they need to stick with it. There is a culture of God complex within the police departments across the country. And it is because a civil rights law that was once enacted to protect Black people or to protect citizens in general, but the actual case law was because of Black people and the Ku Klux Klan. This civil rights law was to protect citizens, was manipulated by a judge, probably a racist judge at some point, to then protect law enforcement, to make them immune from accountability for violating your civil rights, whether they murder you, abuse you, rob you. So when we are in the street saying, why do they keep killing us? Why does this keep happening? The puzzle piece that I believe is the linchpin to all of this is immunity. It's called qualified immunity. It is a Supreme Court doctrine. This is the highest court in the land. So every court underneath the Supreme Court follows their precedent. And that precedent says, if a police officer shoots you in the face point blank, and there's no case law prior in which the police officer was found guilty, then there is no way to hold the police officer liable.
Yeah, it's one of the things in law school we learn really quickly is around the burden of proof, and the heightened burden of proof of qualified immunity for police officers allowed them to operate above the law with no accountability. Then when you compound that with district attorneys who are oftentimes elected, seeing themselves more aligned with law enforcement as opposed to the voters who put them in office, we get a double whammy in our communities, but only in our communities in many cases. So I'm gonna ask you a trick question. And it's a trick question because one of my close friends is a literature professor. He's a writer, and we used to spend hours just because we had nothing to do just after college on this issue of what comes first, art or activism? Is it that art influence activism, or does activism influence art? What do you think?
Okay. I think the activism influences the art. When you have an emotion, you use that emotion as inspiration for the art. The song that comes to mind is Happy Birthday, Martin Luther King by Stevie Wonder.
Yeah.
There was a moment, right, where Stevie Wonder was inspired by the activism to create this song. The song, the art, eventually helped in popularizing the message and helped push for the actual holiday, right? So in that sense, the chicken and the egg is really clear. But it's really also important that the song was created in order to help push. Right. I don't know in any other instance where it's that clear, but I know that music can make a difference. The movements choose the songs. The songs cannot be forced on the movement. And it's important that artists continue to keep making music that is activist minded, that is compassion minded, that is transformation minded, so that there can be an opportunity for these themes to help us, mantras for us to repeat as we march in the street and make all these phone calls to all these senators and lawmakers.
It's like Marvin Gaye, What's Going On, in the height of the Black Power movement, or Nina Simone, Mississippi Goddamn, in the middle of the civil rights movement.
Sam Cooke, Change Is Gonna Come.
Right. That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And it's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful marriage. And I tell people that movements are not only intergenerational. It cannot be young versus old. It never can be us versus us. It is about all of us using our platform to further social change and equality. And that's really important. That's why I was so excited when we put this together, because you're one of the many voices that kind of can help, move the activism, the energy around it, and the continuity of it becomes important, because you get a Mr. B, and he kind of did all he could, and now you have a Danny Glover in that space, and Danny has done a lot, and you see Common, and you see many others who are now jumping into that space. Go ahead. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there are many artists who are lending their voice to making these changes visible, or at least the push for change visible. Really, I feel like it's important for us to continue. We never let up. It's constant vigilance. You can't stop. Like I said before, the darkness, the dark forces are always active, and they don't have a conscience. They don't have a heart. So we just always have to be on watch.
Yeah. So we are around 50 days before the election. All right. If you could have a magic wand of what we should do between now and the election, what would that be?
the magic wand would be to register every 18 to 25-year-old who probably thinks progressively and is ready for some change in the world, and support the DNC lawyer, Mark Elias, who's suing 17 different states because
we was on a call with Mark yesterday. Funny.
Mark Elias is a hero. He's suing the Secretary of State or the state secretaries across the country who are threatening our election and electoral system. And the Republican, the GOP, have a $20 million war chest that they are investing in suing states to reverse laws to make it harder for people to vote. They are trying to create situations where, like in Florida, Mark Elias told me about how the GOP was able to restrict voting booths from college campuses. Totally illegal. So, of course, he sued and won. And so college campuses can have voting booths, plebiscites. But why are they doing this? It's because they know they can't win without playing these games. When Trump came out and said, you know, the mail-in voting system is a fraud and it's going to be a cause for a lot of voter fraud. It's because he knows that's what they do. This police officer in Minneapolis who murdered George Floyd had voted twice. He voted in Minneapolis and he voted in Florida. It's because the Republicans know what they do. They know what they've been doing. And so when he says out to all Republicans, you should vote twice just to prove them that the system is broken, he's just making it clear what they've been doing for years.
Yeah. And I want to put a quick notation. Mark is out there doing some great work, but we also got to recognize the work of Sherilyn Ifill with Legal Defense Fund and some amazing lawsuits they're bringing forward. Judy Brown DeAnnis and the Advancement Project and some of the amazing policy and lawsuits that they're bringing forward. Stacey Abrams and Fair Fight and some of the lawsuits they're bringing forward. Christian Clark and Damien at Laura's Committee. And I got to do this because these are my friends too. And many of us have known each other from the 90s and kind of matured through the process, straight out of law school. So I think Mark is doing some amazing things, but if I don't mention those sisters and brothers, they will shoot me later, because this is an opportunity for all of us to stand up together. There could never be any organizational competition when the whole community, and for that matter, democracy, is under attack. So it's good to hear you mention Mark, because he's doing some amazing work, but there are so many groups and so many individuals out here on the front line, Gary Blesso in Texas, who are all fighting for democracy to work. Because if this democracy breaks down, African Americans particularly, but so many communities will be the targets. And that target will result in some of us being incarcerated unfairly. That target could result in some of us being killed unfairly. The target would definitely result in the exploitation of our labor, the exploitation of our environment. It's not a good ending, not a good ending at all. And so, in wrapping it up, and I could talk all day with you, what would be the three things you would strongly encourage your counterparts in the entertainment industry to do?
Oh, okay. So number one, it is to don't be afraid to use your voice in social media and in public for what you believe the future should look like. When you take an opportunity to stand up for your fans, they're gonna love you even more, because as you go out there and make your songs and try to be famous and you know, dazzle them with your talents, they're suffering. They're living under, you know, this pandemic in a way that you probably are immune to, not medically immune, but because you can insulate yourself from a lot of the issues that other people have. So number one is don't be afraid to use your voice for political speech. Number two is get educated. Get educated. Understand, we're not just going to this election to vote for a president. We're going to this election to vote all the way down the ballot, maybe start from the bottom and go to the top, because you already know who you're going to vote at the top. And make sure, if you know, get educated, but make sure as an artist, you're helping to educate your fans too. Let them know that the DA is an important person when it comes to charging police for their misconduct, for their murder, for their abuse criminally. Let them know that your legislatures are the ones that can pass laws to remove police immunity, so that people who have been violated can receive remedy for violations of their civil rights. And that's voting for the legislators, the assembly members and the senators of your state. Get educated. Know that the mayor oftentimes is the person who chooses the police chief. That police chief has a lot to do with how the police union contracts are written for police officers, has a lot to do with the culture of policing within the city and the municipality. Get educated on local measures. Learn how to create and draft a measure so that your fans can come with you in pushing for the kind of change you want to see in your community. Lastly, I would say to all my peers in music, if you just don't have the time for it, we have a coalition that's working hard, and we have experts, lawyers, legal experts, activists that are all part of the coalition. If you don't know what, we'll tell you what. Just be there. Just be there, because I know you care.
So this is going to be some shameless plugs I'm about to do, but in that is embedded all of these requests that you can't say no to, right? So one, I love the Blackish episode. That was off the chart. And I remember growing up, and the Saturday morning cartoons had "I'm Just a Bill." I want us to do a remake of that after the election when we're successful to address policing. How to move us from protests in the street where we're seeing people lined up now to power at the polling place. But then once we leave the election and we will be successful, what are the public policy changes necessary? And so to figure out how we can do something like that Blackish piece, put around "I'm Just a Bill" dealing with mass incarceration. You just said yes. I appreciate you saying yes to that, right? Secondly, well, I can hear it too, right? Secondly, with the coalition, we are launching a misinformation campaign for the next 50 days as the conservative movement put misinformation around voting. Would you be willing to partner with us to have a counter narrative? We could provide the fact for social media posts for you and your counterparts to say, hey, they say you could vote twice. Nope, here's the facts, post it on your social media. Because when I'm looking at people like you and many of your counterparts, you have larger followings collectively than CNN viewerships. Actually, you have larger followings collectively than CNN, Fox, MSNBC combined. And if we can counter the false narrative, if we can put accurate information out. So that's the second one. And then third thing I would request is that after this election is over, continue to do what you're doing, because it's so important for those situated like you in an entertainment industry to use your platform for social good. It can be specific around race, or it can be general around how we are civil to one another and how our public policies impact us, whether negatively or positively. If I can get commitments to those three things, I'm pausing right there.
Right on. Well, I'm committed. So my job is to get all of the members of the Music Coalition committed as well.
Yeah. Any final thoughts?
Yeah, final thoughts is everybody needs to be educated on what to vote for. Again, we already know what's at the top of the ballot with the president, but all of these other items at the bottom of the ballot directly affect how policing happens and law enforcement happens in your neighborhood. So know who you're going to vote for. And if you don't know, find your local civil rights organization. They will have a cheat sheet for you, and vote along their suggestions. That's what I would like to tell everybody.
Yeah. Listen, I truly appreciate you taking time out your busy schedule for this moment. NAACP, the oldest civil rights organization in the country, but we absolutely recognize that none of our organizations can do it alone. And And I've never been an organizational elitist. I tell people to get engaged, no matter what vehicle you pick. Get engaged. So thank you for this moment. I'm sure the viewers, our delegates, would truly appreciate hearing from you. And as we look forward after the election, let's continue to look at ways we can partner.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.